afternoon, everyone. My name's Tracy Palazzo Barnes. I'm from a trade association called KNX UK. And we're here to talk to you this afternoon about sustainability and the need to change the way we do things and the way we value our resources. Advancing technology is really great, but dumping precious resources every time a new technology comes out isn't quite so great. So that's what we're going to be talking to you about today. I am joined today, it's not working again, by Ian Gordon, Managing Director of GES Digital, and Paul Jones, Director UK and Ireland of BEG. And they're both going to tell you a little bit about themselves.
Thank you, Tracy. So BEG, we make predominantly lighting controls. My interest in sustainability is ensuring that we have systems that can be modified and changed rather than ripping out and starting again. Try and look at the energy conservation, look at the true cost of the products, what we can achieve. So that's my interest in sustainability.
My name's Ian Gordon. I'm an installer, a contractor, and my interest in sustainability is about making the right sustainable decisions for my business and for my customers alike. So rather than just give them a solution that ticks all the boxes technically, I give them a solution that ticks all the boxes correctly, but also has a lifespan beyond possibly my client's lifespan. So I'm designing systems that will last as long as the building lasts. So if we look that we're building properties that are expected to last 100 years plus, then I'm looking at installing systems that will last 100 years plus. That's my interest in the sustainability.
Thank you. So this is what sustainability by design is really all about, looking very closely at how we're using our resources now and also in the future. To keep things simple, we've split this afternoon's talk into 3 sections. Paul, what can you tell us about energy efficiency?
Energy efficiency is about trying to make the most of your energy, not get it wasted. Simple things of having the lights turned off when they're not needed, either because there's no one in the room, no demand, or simply because there's enough natural light. Using resources effectively.
I'm going to talk to you about basically the building regulations and how the building regulations have changed in the last couple of years, especially in order to try and encapsulate a little bit more energy saving, energy conservation into your buildings and make your buildings more sustainable. Last year, there were amendments to a couple of the building regulations, Part F for ventilation and Part O for overheating. They also had Part L, which is the conservation of energy and fuel in order to run buildings. So all 3 of them webbed together quite nicely. So in terms of Part F of the building regulations, ventilation, they tell you that you have to take the correct steps in order to make sure a building is ventilated. And that covers things like how many air changes per hour in a building of a specific use. So a house will be different from a bathroom, will be different from a commercial kitchen, for instance. But it's mandated in the regulations now. So when you're developing a building and when you go to get final sign-off of that building, there will be various checks and measures to make sure that you have achieved that part of the building regulations. It also, I mentioned Part O, which is for overheating, and Part L, which is for the conservation of fuel and power. And all 3 of these work quite well together. You need to ventilate a building, but you don't want to take all the hot air out of your building in winter. And equally, you don't want to introduce a load of hot air in the summer when you're trying to cool your building. So you can actually link these 2 parts of the building regs together quite nicely if you use a building control solution, for instance. So in my circumstances, mainly within sustainable buildings, I mainly work in the residential sector with houses that are built in factories, off-site construction. But they're done to a very high standard, and this also includes solar shading on the outside of a building. So in Southern Europe, you will find most of the buildings have some form of solar shade, or brise soleil as we quite often call them here, on the outside of the building to shade part of the interior. the clever thing is when you start making these facades dynamic and you can control the amount of shading that is happening within a building. And a clear distinction to make and a benefit that you can extrapolate from the effect of our beautiful sun up in the sky is in the winter, rather than shading all the solar out, you allow it in and you actually heat the interior of a room with the sun as opposed to having to buy gas or electricity in order to do the same. And then in summer, you're shading the sun out, but you're not shading it out completely so the room's dark and you have to turn lights on. You're shading out enough of the sunlight so that you don't end up with solar gain inside the room, thus turning your air conditioning up, but you're still maintaining enough light in that room for you not to have to turn your lights on. So if you have the correct kind of building control solution, a sustainable one that uses all the correct methodologies, you can actually use what the building regulations are asking to be mandated to work in cohesion with each other to satisfy both parts of that part of the building regulations. What I will say is building regs has changed a lot in the last 20 years, and whereby it used to be an officer from the local council that would come out and check that every building is achieving compliance. Now you have third-party companies who do this under contract. And obviously their insurance is very high level, so if ever they get scrutinised and are found to be fiddling the information, for instance, they will be culpable. But effectively, building control from your local council has been superseded by building control by a private enterprise. It works very well. I see it in practice all the time. But what you're relying on with building control is their understanding of the regulations and how they're achieved. With private companies doing it, you stand a better chance of them having a better knowledge of that. And perhaps you being able to influence them with information as opposed to them just stonewalling you and say, no, it doesn't comply. Other parts of the building regulations, Part L, quite clearly, conservation of fuel and power. It's something we're all very aware of now, more so than ever before. The fact that they're putting it into the building regulations means that we're under an onus now to take some responsibility for that. Whether that will prevent us having situations like we've got at the moment with the cost of fuel the way it is, I don't think it will cause any change in that happening, but it will perhaps make us a little bit more aware of what we can do in order to maximise what we're buying and get the most out of it.
So Ian spoke about a little bit about the regulations. Obviously, Part L, Volume 1 and Volume 2 came into law 15th of June last year. So these should be followed. One of the key things it's talking about is efficiency. Efficiency in terms of the energy performance and also the emissions rate, trying to reduce the amount of carbon that's consumed every year. So where is this coming to KNX? So KNX is really about linking multiple systems together. The whole point about an efficient building is whether you're controlling the lighting or whether you're controlling the heating, it's linking it together. So having buildings that are, the management system is linked, so temperature, time, demand control, so you're all linking it together. So having a uniform system that connects and talks to one another. Predominantly in systems in the past, you might have had a lighting control system, you might just had a heating system in. Now, even with the new regs, which have to say talk about the minimum standard, not the maximum. The bare essentials, should we say? There's a lot more that could be done. One of the things about the regs is talking about just having thermostatic radiator valves or having, time control. When you have a system such as KNX, you can link it in with better demand control. So having it, sensor controlled, having the sensors controlling, linking into the hot water. For example, in hotels now with KNX, you go into the bathrooms, the hot water is instantaneous. The system is ready to go. And as Ian also said a little bit, it's about the shading, looking at the solar gain, just trying to maximize what you have available. So having a single platform allows all the various connected systems to come together into something that's usable. So you have one system, one management system that gives you the integration. And that's what KNX offers to you.
Multiple systems on a single platform, it's the panacea that we all look for, certainly in my field where you're working perhaps in a high-end residential situation, if you explain to your customer that in order for them to control their lights, their heating, their air conditioning, their cinema, the windows, the blinds, they may need lots of disparate controls that all look slightly different because the manufacturer all has their own slant on how things are presented to the end user. By going over onto a single platform, you can get rid of all of that disparity. You can get rid of all that difference and variety and have one product on the wall made by one company in one finish. Now, if you were to look directly behind yourselves at Jung in the corner behind you, they're a product manufacturer from Germany. And if you buy a switch from them that's perhaps for KNX, they do KNX switches, and have it in a particular color, they can also provide you all the sockets, all the data outlets, all the TV positions, everything that you require in the room at that same finish, at that same color. So not only have you technically achieved what you want to achieve in the color and finish you want, but the whole room looks the same. And that might not be important in a commercial building, but in a hotel suite or in a high-end residential situation, it's very important. The interior designer, the architect, everyone has a say, even including the end user who's paying for it. But you've got lots of people who have lots of influence, who want to make lots of choice over how those things are presented. So on the consumer side and on the design side, it's really evident that this is something that will answer those questions. On the technicalities, for me, it makes complete sense. I can measure the temperature of that room in one position. I can use that to control the heating in the winter. I can use it to control the air conditioning in the summer. I can also use it to maybe open a window automatically to let a volume of hot air out that's collected within the space. And you're doing all of this from one position on the wall. You don't need additional sensors. You don't need additional locations. And then if that's not enough, in 5 years' time, when your partner changes their design style and insists they want everything to be black in that room or fuchsia pink, you just change the product. You don't change the system. You don't change the equipment that's back in the plant room or controlling the HVAC or turning on the heating. You just change that interface that you see in the room. And you can have one interface in one room and a completely different interface in another room if that's what you want. An example would be children's bedrooms, where you want it nice and simple for your children, and then your master suite might be very complex, might have lots of functions that your children do not need. And that's the beauty of a single platform system that's got the power that KNX has. Not only do you have the choice of functionality to control the blinds, to follow the sun in the sky, to control the heating, to turn the air conditioning on and off or up and down, but you also have the choice in finish, color, and location for these devices. And that gives you a really powerful, certainly as an installer, it gives you a really powerful set of tools to talk to a client about how to create solutions for their building. It's not just isolated to residential either. If you look at high-end commercial, and whether that's an MDU, multiple dwelling unit, which has got mixed use, or whether that's Terminal 5 at Heathrow Airport or the Jubilee line extension just outside, these things use KNX for a reason, and it's because it's positively adaptable and it meets the needs of both the engineering side of the project and ultimately the people who use it and pay for it. For me, I mean, a couple of summary points. Energy targets, we all know the pressure we're under at the moment.
Yep. Keep the energy consumption down. So that, talk about the appliances you buy. We've all seen the A to F ratings, I think it is.
Yes, yeah, that you see on your washing machine.
But a lot of people still don't understand what that means. Just being careful, looking at the energy side of it, being sensible in choices.
Yeah, I mean, don't forget, a building control system itself uses energy in order to save you energy. There's a little bit of an irony in that, I think. You just have to bear in mind that whatever you're using in order to control your building outweighs its savings or creates more saving than it costs. But statistically, by using building controls over by not using building controls, you are going to save yourself 40% on your energy consumption across virtually every part of a building. So using the correct controls is definitely the right thing to do.
Agree.
I think in building regs terms, the ventilation and overheating, there is a a continuous change in how this is implied and how this is delivered to us. But as I mentioned earlier, I think there is a shortfall in knowledge when it comes to the experts who come and sign off the buildings. And whether that's a council representative or a freelance company, the moment you start talking about building controls and the energy savings, I can imagine most of them would be not largely disinterested, but it would fall a bit further than their remit. So I think you just have to be careful how you verse that.
I think you're right. It's a lack of understanding of what's a choice. We'd still see standards.
Knowledge gap. Yeah.
Putting a switch, put a sensor in, does it automatically. Why worry about someone, remembering to switch it off? Technology is there, should be used.
Yeah, and you don't consider how your car does what it does anymore, do you? You get in it, you press a button and the window opens. You don't think about how that works or why it's convenient anymore. But I think if you got in a car today and found it had a handle to wind down the window, you'd be positively surprised. You think, what's this for? I think my kids would wonder what it was for.
Very true.
Okay, so moving on to resources. Paul, what can you tell us about building buildings sustainably?
I think the key thing, I remember listening to some of the presentations earlier today, was talking about starting it from the design process, making sure that all the different services are involved at the beginning. There's a talk by one of the lighting designers to making sure that lighting is a part of the original design. So you're looking at sustainability for the building with lighting. The comment was putting control systems in. Lighting can change, that the building use can change. So looking how you have that flexibility in a room. We see now, I suppose a lot of offices now, since COVID, people looking to make smaller rooms. How can you make the room smaller and still attractive without having huge costs? So having a sustainable system to begin with allows you to make those alterations over time. So the building, I suppose, grows with the occupants, and also doesn't need to change when the occupants change. We saw a building, last week that was set for offices, is now going to be used for school classrooms. They're making some of the rooms a bit bigger, but the system that they have in place is still suitable. All they have to do is some of the stud work and some of the framework. You have that flexibility in what you're going for. I think also sustainability is about the choices for whose products you use. Having products you think to last for a time. The UK is very much, it sometimes seems to be driven by the cost of the product rather than looking at the overall building cost and how that product will fit in over time. Can that product keep going for 20 or 30 years? People looking at buildings now, since the horrors at, Grenfell, looking at buildings going to last for 60 years. How about some of the components of that building? Can they last for that time? Is that the sustainability of it? Talking to someone today, talking about the buildings, taking the roofs out, the steel floors. Can it be reused? Can it be reused in another building? So often we've seen in category A fit out, client will come in and then rip everything out. All the lighting gets ripped out and thrown away. Why is that? Can't you have lighting that is designed to be used for a lot of occupants? So there's lots of choices there, and those choices come in from the design process and also from the clients. Thinking about the lighting, does it have to be the same in every office you operate in, or can you have that flexibility? So yes, about having choice with the building and the materials you use.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. I totally agree. In terms of KNX as a sustainable choice in relation to this, just to give you a bit of background for those of you who do not know what KNX is, KNX is a language, if you like, for building controls. It was founded in 1990 in Central Europe by 5 companies, and they came together to stop effectively having arguments over whose system was better. They decided that they could pool all their resources and bring 3 systems together, that's what they were, into one cohesive system. One, they could all benefit from retaining their market segment, but 2, that they could grow the whole culture of this system. So when they set the standard in 1990, that standard is still the same today. So in simple terms, the language they created 33 years ago has not changed, which means that if I have a device that was put into a building 33 years ago, I can walk in today with my laptop, plug into the system and manipulate that device that's 33 years old and add a device that is no days old. I've just picked up from a supplier, and the two are guaranteed to talk to each other. They talk exactly the same language. And so I can get a product that's 33 years old to respond to the product that I've just bought. And that's a guarantee. That's what the KNX symbol stands for, that you see on all the products. There's a couple of stands around this local area with KNX products on them. If it says KNX on it, it means it can talk to other KNX devices. Currently, there are over 70,000 different products, 8,000 product groups and 70,000 different products you can choose from to satisfy your control needs on a building project. So you're not going to be limited by technicality. The only thing you're going to be limited by is whether you can find it in amongst the 500 companies that produce these products. So in terms of sustainability with product, if company A decides that they've had enough, they're going to retire, everyone's going to pack up their machines and go home, company B, who are still operating, will make a product that's very similar to company A's, and the guarantee is you will be able to talk to it in exactly the same way you were able to talk to company A's. And that's a very sustainable approach. If any of you know anything about control systems, you'll know that the big players in the market have changed their protocol and their semantics many, many times over the years because they found better ways of doing it, because they found more efficient ways of transmitting data. Absolutely, it's not just because they want to make life difficult for you, but it does mean that Series 1 will not work with Series 2, will not work with Series 3. And what does that lead to? If you work in our sector, you'll know that you see skips full of product being taken away every time a building is being refurbished. And Paul talked about the core building materials being recycled and reused and buildings being reimagined or repurposed. With KNX in a building, all you have to do is change the products that are on the end of the KNX system, or update them or reposition them. You don't have to pull the whole system out. So what you installed 33 years ago can still be adapted to what you want to do with the building today. And if you look at our buildings that we're building now, you're talking a minimum of 50 years, maybe 100 years for that building's lifespan. When you deliver a building, 3 to 5% of the cost of that building in its lifetime is for delivery. The rest of it is maintenance, energy cost, refurbishment, and then obviously demolition at the end, putting it all into a skip and taking it away. So you're only talking about 3 to 5% of the total cost for that building in its lifetime being due to its construction and its fit out. So for the sake of adding technology correctly at the beginning, when you first start this building, sure, you don't have a crystal ball, so you don't know what's coming in 20 years' time. But if you fit the right technology in the background, you can bet your bottom dollar that it can be adapted to suit. And this is what KNX allows you to do. A really good example is IoT. IoT is something that we're all familiar with today. Internet of Things. Your fridge talks to the internet. Your hairdryer talks to the internet. Your car talks to the internet. KNX was talking to the internet 18 years ago. They didn't say KNX IoT. They didn't say, look how advanced we are. They're just a bunch of grey, dull engineers, and they made this stuff work. But for me as an installer, I was able to use my laptop on a Wi-Fi connection running around very big houses, programming by Wi-Fi, which nobody else was doing at the time. And what it basically means is I was able to use the latest technology without a big fanfare, without a big announcement, on the current systems that I was using and the equipment I was using, with the addition of one little product, one IP gateway. And all of a sudden I opened up a whole host of other features that I didn't know existed, but someone had taken the time to develop. And that's the big advantage you have with a system like KNX, is that you've got over 500 companies developing technology to talk the KNX language. And that's a really compelling reason for sustainability in my mind.
So moving on, how would this technology best be applied to public buildings and hospitality? Paul, do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I think it's about choice. public buildings now, people are looking for their BREEAM ratings, the LED ratings, what are they doing in their buildings? Having that choice about the system and how it's going to give them that sustainable goals. How are they going to be ensure that that building is energy efficient? Ian mentioned earlier that obviously, the last 12, 13 months, people have seen their energy bills rise dramatically. What can they do? We spoke about changing the standards, Part L, pushing people to be more efficient. What we're finding is people are being pushed to be efficient by their rising costs. What can they do to save money and to be more efficient in the way they work? And the other thing we're finding about the buildings is that with this, COVID, people working at home, offices have to be more welcoming. The environment where people offer, ideally the perfect temperature, the perfect humidity, the perfect lighting. The air quality is good, the CO2 levels are great. That's what you're looking for in the buildings. So public buildings and offices and hospitality is making sure that building, those rooms, are giving people comfortable spaces to working. So when we're looking at the public buildings, is looking at the HVAC. KNX can give you that control. You can link into systems. So for example, KNX will link into the trend system. The KNX system, you can link into the HVAC system, so you can give people, the clients in those buildings, good spaces to be in, and attract them back to the office. And the other thing is about this maintenance side of it. With these systems, having one system such as KNX, it gives you a single platform for the maintenance, single platform for the facility management team to know what they need to go and look at, to go and do the replacement, to make sure the checks are done, make sure the air quality levels are good, to make sure the lighting's working, the emergency lighting system is correct. So having that single system, bringing everything together, really does enable those commercial buildings to give people just better sustainable building. Yeah.
And how does that work when you're looking at future-proofing housing stock, Ian?
Future-proofing housing stock. I think the first thing we should clear up with housing stock is the way we view buildings, certainly in this country, in homes. Our parents, or certainly my parents, when they were looking for a home to bring me and my siblings up in, they wanted a family home. And the moment they had got rid of the kids, all the kids had gone off to education or to work, and they were looking to downsize into a home that was more suitable and fitted their needs. And then, of course, add another 15 years to that, they're looking for a home that's perhaps easier to maintain, where they perhaps don't have a garden and it's a bit closer to the shops. But one of the restrictions you have in homes these days is that a house that perhaps was your family home at some point becomes not suitable for you because perhaps you have mobility issues. And one of the current trends that we're seeing in bigger houses, it has to be said, is people making provision for a lift shaft in their house before they've even finished it, before they even need a lift shaft. So they'll create a space, and it might be the downstairs cloakroom leads to an upstairs cupboard on the landing. And that's a clear space for them to put a lift in the future. So when perhaps they can't use the stairs quite so easily, as opposed to having a stair lift that runs up a rail around the stairs and makes it very difficult for everyone else using the stairs, you have a very cheap cost elevator, domestic elevator. And these can go in for 10, 20,000 euros in a home, which, okay, I concede that's not cheap. But if faced with moving house or putting a lift in, it's a nice option to have as a homeowner. And I think that goes much beyond just the ideology of having a lift shaft in your house, which clearly doesn't affect too many of us, I would imagine. But having a house that can adapt with you. So instead of you fit out your house and that's it, it's fancy, it's got all the gadgets in it, and then 20 years later, your vision's not quite as good, your hearing's not quite as good. You don't need quite so much fancy lighting. You just need it to be more functional. And perhaps even to the point where your light switch, which had lots of buttons, you now only want it to have one button. One button turns the lights on, again turns the lights off. And that might be a better use of your time and perhaps your vision's going, perhaps you need brighter lights. So it's not just about having a house that could have a lift shaft, it's about having a house that can adapt with you. And that could be a way for you to have a wheelchair ramp into the front door so that you can come in simply. But it also might be that your house system is keeping an eye on you, and perhaps it's telling your children or your responsible carers what you're up to. Now, in the assisted living sector, which is where people live on their own outside of a hospital environment, but with some assistance, there is technology that satisfies that assistance. So it could be something as simple as a nurse call system, which is an emergency pull cord to summons help if you fall over. But more interestingly, recently, it's devices on fridges that watch whether you are opening and shutting the fridge regularly. And that perhaps tells someone whether you're still up and about, making yourself a cup of tea like your habits dictate you would. And so it's dual-pronged, really, this is. If you have a house that has a system in it inherently that can be adapted to suit your needs as you grow older, not only does it make it quick and accessible to do, it also means you don't have to go through a whole heap of remodelling in your home. If I told you what the NHS currently recommend in this country, there are a couple of brands they use. I won't mention the brands, but one of them's an Australian creature that hangs from a tree. Is that simple enough? Yeah, I think so. And that system, when you see it installed in someone's house, it's all screwed directly onto the skirting boards around the door frames. It's not pretty, it's not intelligent, and it's certainly not sustainable. But it's a solution that gives that person that sense of independence outside of being in a hospital or a cared for environment. And if you have the correct kind of building control system, then you can add to that, adapt it very simply, without having to add stuff onto the skirting boards or around the door frames of the house of the individual who needs that help. So the sustainability part of building controls and KNX goes far beyond just whether the system ends up being skipped in 20 years. It's whether the system can adapt to suit the change of need of that building. And Paul mentioned commercial buildings changing use. Happens all the time. And there are commercial buildings with KNX that are being remodeled every single day of the week. If we have this in the domestic sector, in the residential sector, it will be fantastic. We as a company have priced a couple of conversions for people to convert their house to KNX to facilitate assisted living, but it's expensive. And if any of you have got parents or grandparents in care, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not something that you can afford to just throw money at. But I think certainly from my perspective and my friends around me, we would like to think that we'll maintain enough independence to stay in our own homes as long as we can. We don't want to be a burden. Our families probably can't afford to send us into care. And to be honest, we all have a kind of viewpoint of what the care sector looks like, and perhaps we don't want to enter that sector. So the sustainability goes far beyond just the word. It goes into every aspect of what we provide and what we provision for people, both in the workplace and at home.
No, agreed. I think, as Ian said, you have a system in place. You can make the changes to that system. You're not touching the backbone. You're just changing, I suppose, the nodes that you interface with. It gives you that flexibility. And I think the UK domestic houses has a long way to go in terms of, we live in one house for our life. At the moment, I think people living in 5 or 6 different properties in a lifetime. Yeah. You don't model your house as you change. You go to a new house. Maybe that isn't sustainable. Maybe you should be living in one house that changes with you as you change over life.
That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Yeah. Would be nice.
Would we like to take some questions now? Anyone got any questions for?
What happens if there's a power cut?
I'm afraid probably you still get the candle out and light a match. It's a very good question. What happens if there's a power cut? Statistically, now, if you live in a suburb or an urban area, your chances of a power failure for any length of time are very, very small. When we look at clients who generally are spending quite a lot of money on houses, one of the first things we do when they're remote is ask them when they last had a power cut where they live. And if you are in an urban situation in the outskirts of a city or a town, it's unlikely to have been that recently. And if they have had one, if you ask them, they'll say it's for 10 minutes, 15 minutes maximum. So it's generally very small. There's a certain juxtaposition. Our really wealthy clients live in the middle of nowhere and they have the worst power possible and the worst broadband possible. Yet they want the privacy, but there's this cut-off about services in the vicinity. So the more rural you get, the more frequent and the longer term your power cuts will be. But as they consider, I think by 2050, 75% of the world's population will live in cities. That's where the power is most secure, within a city environment.
Sorry, what do you do if it happens? If you do have a power cut, is there some overriding system so to enable your facilities to run?
Yeah, so you get into the realms of things like emergency lighting, which is very common in commercial buildings and anywhere where the public are. Somewhere like here, if the power went off, there'd be enough light for all of us to leave the building. In a house, people generally do not want it or ask for it because they'll just say, I have my phone, it's got a torch on it, and I'll find my way to the candles and the box of matches to light everything. If you lose power, ultimately you lose everything that needs power, whether that's your dishwasher, your immersion tank, and maybe your fancy blinds or your television. All of that goes. There's a big sway at the moment towards the use of renewables and people storing their own energy at home. So that swing where you end up with batteries, solar panels, and then all you're doing is charging up your batteries off of the mains and you're using your batteries intelligently. It could, in theory, get rid of that issue. However, it's money. Most people can't afford to invest in the batteries for a house, certainly enough batteries to run a house. And I think it's just that balance between what's convenient and what we perhaps shouldn't moan about because it's a first world problem. And really, there are other people suffering from a lot worse than a 15-minute power cut. But I understand your point. In situations like a building controls scenario, when the power goes, everything stops. The moment it comes back on, if it's an intelligent system and it's programmed correctly, it will come back where it was before the power went off and it will operate as it was beforehand. The clocks don't need resetting. It's not like the oven. Everything's automatic, so it'll all synchronize itself and you wouldn't have to worry about it as a homeowner. But you will still lose your TV. You won't be able to watch the news or anything else. So you won't be able to cook. Without your electricity, you're in a difficult place. But the statistics are pretty robust in terms of people living in cities, the number of power cuts in cities, the duration of power cuts in cities. They're very minimal. And the moment you've got enough money to live in isolation in the middle of nowhere, that's when the problems really start. Is that okay? Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Any questions from anybody else?
Hi, I'm a student. I may ask some naive question, but when you developing this platform, how you know that it will going to help your clients? How do you know the requirements or the things that the clients want?
How do we know what the client wants in terms of the solutions we offer?
So the solution is the things that your clients want. How you validate it?
How do I validate it?
Yeah.
In simple terms, I'd like to think my client comes to me because they know this is what I do for a living, and that I eat, sleep, and breathe building controls in loose terms. So I have a business. I've been in business for almost 30 years. I'd like to have my business until I stop without any problems. So there's a reason for me to be honest and to validate what I do with my customers. But it's all about relationships. If I meet a new client and I can generate a nice, respectful, two-way relationship, then hopefully the advice I give them will be the advice they seek. You get a sense for some clients. Some clients, when you walk into a room, I'm not going to sell them that. I won't be able to sell them that. And other clients, you will know that you can. But I think that's part of the journey of discovery with new clients. It's one of the exciting bits about what we do, is trying to figure out how I can help each unique individual.
So, sorry, is that based on your own experience for 30 years?
Yeah, largely. I mean, coming to shows like this, you walk around, you see what's happening. Some things you might shake your head at and think never, and some things you think that's a really good idea. Ultimately, industry helps us choose because industry develops as one. But for me, building controls is very much a big topic. For me, KNX was the only choice because it's the one that's completely agnostic of one company. It's not manufacturer-led. So I knew that when I chose that, if company A goes, I have company B to Z to choose from. And generally, it's about me talking to my customer and getting them to trust me. And if I can do that, then the choices I make are generally the choices they go with.
Okay, and then,
Thank you.
Sorry, I think Ian talks about system is that generally a lot of clients have a view of what they're looking for. There's a lot of showrooms out there that can show them what's possible in a system. So they have those choices. But yeah, as Ian said, it's about relationship, really.
Any more?
Okay, we had one come in via email, which was about luxury. Some people confuse KNX with being only for the luxury market.
Oh,
Do you have anything to say about that, either of you?
Luxury. I think luxury in terms of energy costs is about being efficient, not wasting. Yes, there is any system you put in, there is let's say a startup cost. The cabling, the system you're putting in, for example, but it's about the long-term cost. What are you getting out of the system? What are you saving over the longer term? But also what you're getting out of the system for that flexibility. The cost needs to be looked at the whole life cycle. It's like any investment cost. What do you get out of it, and how do you determine that? That cost. Energy prices going up so much. The paybacks are, in some cases, are a lot quicker now. But also, you're looking at, some houses. You look at people, putting audiovisual systems in for their cinema rooms. You're not going to get the payback on that, but people are looking at the quality. But when you look at everyone at home now, the amount of time, streaming services, that people watch television, the television costs, the systems, linking it all together is pretty manageable. There's an overall side of it.
And to add to that, I personally would like to see building controls as the standard. I would like to see building controls in every building, whether it's a small house or a big office building. And calling it luxury, I think, is misleading. You can develop a system for very low cost, and I would challenge that actually as a cost over what it would cost for a normal analog system with normal switches, you could do it for maybe a 30% increase in the cost of the system on a standard house. So that in real terms might translate to 3, 4, 5,000 euros more to develop a house that's got smart technology at its core instead of just normal switches. Where I live in Hampshire near Winchester, and they're building a brand new housing estate. There were 2,000 brand new houses. Those houses will still be standing in 100 years, and none of them are smart. None of them have any technology in them other than an aerial on the roof and some solar panels. That's it. So it's going to be 100 years before they're flattened and brand new ones built with building controls in them. So we do have a long way to catch up with. But I think the suggestion that building controls is a luxury is a bit like saying electric windows on your car now is a luxury. You buy any car now and it will almost certainly have electric windows, and you don't even consider it. When you go to the showroom, it's not on the list of options to have electric windows anymore. You just get a car and it has electric windows. And as a consumer, I would challenge that if you went into a Vauxhall dealership and said, I want a Corsa, please, and you sat in it and it had window winders, you'd say, what's happened? Have we gone backwards? So, in cars, we've passed that threshold now. Your cars are always getting better. Perhaps they have to make them better to make the persuasive argument for you to buy them. But I think house building in the UK especially, we're in the grip of this situation where you've got 5 or 6 massive house builders in the United Kingdom. And they have a set of building regulations that Paul mentioned earlier. You only have to get to the minimum standard. You don't have to go beyond that. And they're churning out these houses as quickly as they can for the lowest possible cost. Don't believe anyone when they tell you that they've spent decent money on it, because that's not how they work in business. So these big companies are building houses and they're doing it for the least possible price they can. And their argument will be, oh, well, we need to be able to sell it to people without big wallets, big budgets. Well, in Winchester, they were mandated to build 200 low-cost homes. When the price of the land went up, they managed to wiggle and get the council to let them off the hook. So they don't have to build the 200 low-cost homes in Winchester. They can build them in another town. That doesn't help anyone in Winchester. So it's a really difficult position, I think, when you start looking at how our houses are delivered in the UK. I don't believe the people that are building the houses in the UK will take any of this seriously anyway. They will immediately engineer it out. But I would love to see, in my lifetime, a change where every single house that is built with the best possible specification it can be. And it doesn't need to be expensive. And you, the consumer, and the people who live in the houses will be the ones that truly benefit.
I think it goes back to the comment about sustainability. Trying to have a building that lasts for the future is more than just the bricks and cement. We are used to technology now. We expect it. The way that the way that mobile phones change people's lives, the way they interact with it, they expect the same at home. The technology is here now. It should be used. We should be looking for the future. It does give us those efficiencies and energy uses, and also that sustainability of building lasting. It should be about what's available now. And as Ian said, technology is here. We should be installing it.
Thank you very much. We're out of time now, I'm afraid. Thank you so much for coming to see us. We are literally opposite the bathroom fitter, just to the right there. If you'd like to come and see the guys and ask any more questions, or tap your badge on the reader so you can find out a bit more about us. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you all.